there's his focus on something he calls lethal humidity. That sounded quite alarming.
It is. It's a particularly stark point he makes. He explains it's this deadly condition where the combination of heat and humidity gets so high that the body's natural cooling mechanism, sweating, just stops working.
Your thermoregulation switches off.
Exactly. And the outcome, he stresses, is rapid and certain death. It's binary. And crucially, he argues this isn't some distant future problem. He insists it's happening now, within current election cycles.
Wow.
Yeah, driven by humidity rising, he claims, maybe 7 to 10 times faster than average temperatures are rising. He argues this phenomenon kind of bypasses all the drawn-out debates about the nuances of climate science because the impact death is so undeniable and immediate. He sounded seriously alarmed about recent reports of very rapid jumps in global temperature, seeing it as a direct, imminent threat.
Wow, that definitely frames the urgency in a very visceral way. Okay, switching lenses now. How does Ted Nordhaus view the political landscape for energy transition, especially for something controversial like nuclear power?
Nordhaus highlights this really fascinating tension, particularly in the U.S., regarding nuclear. He points out that the Democratic Party platform at the national level is now explicitly pro-nuclear. It recognizes nuclear as necessary for decarbonization.
Okay, so official party policy is supportive.
Yes. But at the same time, you see Democratic-led states, he mentions California, Illinois, New York, actually closing down existing perfectly functional nuclear power plants.
Huh. That does seem contradictory. What reasons does he give for that disconnect?
Well, he attributes it to a few factors he observes. One is pressure from some environmental groups who might still oppose nuclear, or they might tie any support for keeping a plant open to demands for more renewable subsidies elsewhere.
Okay, political pressure.
Right. And critically, he talks about the business incentives for the utilities themselves. He argues that sometimes utilities can actually make more money by closing a paid-off nuclear plant and running their existing gas plants more often, rather than keeping the nuclear plant open, even if there are potential subsidies on offer.
So the market signals are potentially skewed.
That's his point. He sees this leading to these messy, piecemeal, plant-by-plant political battles and bailout negotiations, rather than a coherent, overarching energy policy framework.
And his suggested solution.
He suggests states could adopt policies that value all zero-carbon energy sources equally. Something like a robust renewable portfolio standard, an RPS, but one that explicitly includes nuclear alongside wind and solar. That way, nuclear gets a stable market signal for its clean energy value, instead of relying on these one-off political deals.
That makes sense, leveling the playing field based on carbon emissions or lack thereof. Does he also talk about the future of nuclear technology itself?
Yes, and he makes a really key distinction between how nuclear power was developed historically and what he thinks is needed now, especially in liberalized economies.
How so?
Well, the traditional path, the big nuclear build-outs in France back in the day, or what you see in some Asian countries now, that involved huge gigawatt-scale reactors. These were typically built by strong, centralized governments, often state-owned enterprises, operating within planned economies.
Right, massive state-led projects.
Exactly. He argues that the model just isn't very feasible or efficient in today's more liberalized, market-driven economies like the US or UK.
So what's the alternative path he sees for nuclear?
He thinks the future, in those contexts, lies more in advanced, often smaller, technologies. Things like small modular reactors, SMRs, or even micronuclear reactors.
Smaller, maybe factory-built units.
Potentially. He believes these are more likely to attract private capital for financing, although he's clear they'll still need significant public support, especially for initial deployment and navigating the regulatory pathways. He places a strong bet on technologies that allow for faster learning by doing.
Meaning
You can build many smaller units more quickly, learn from each one, and drive down costs much faster than you can with enormous one-off mega projects. He even suggests that tiny reactors, like Oklo's perhaps, might have an advantage over larger SMRs, like NuScales, in that specific respect, faster learning cycles. But he reiterates the really big traditional reactors. Given their sheer scale and cost, they fundamentally require public sector financing.
Okay, interesting distinction. And shifting to even broader policy, Nordhaus is known for being pretty skeptical about a global carbon price being the main solution, right?
Yeah, he is. He lays out a couple of main reasons in the sources we looked at. First, just the immense, maybe even implausible challenge of getting genuine global coordination on a uniform carbon price.
Because every country has different priorities.
Exactly. Different economic situations, different geopolitical priorities. Getting everyone to agree on and stick to a meaningful price seems incredibly difficult.
Okay.
Second, he highlights the inherent inequity.
How so?
A uniform price would hit poorer nations much harder, relatively speaking, unless it was paired with truly massive global wealth redistribution from rich countries to poor countries to compensate. And he views that level of redistribution as politically, well, highly unlikely on the scale required.
Even though his uncle, William Nordhaus, won a Nobel for work on carbon pricing.
Right. He references his uncle's work, including the idea of a climate club of cooperating nations, but explains his own view is that the necessary global political and economic conditions just aren't realistically in place for that kind of top-down carbon pricing strategy to be the central driver.
Okay, so, again, these really different perspectives. Forrest, the industrialist, betting big on his tech, hydrogen, and pushing for very specific policy shifts, fix the IMO, fix COP rules.
Get hydrogen deployed now.
Right. And Nordhaus, the policy expert, analyzing the systemic hurdles, advocating for broader, market-friendly frameworks like maybe zero carbon mandates, and being quite pragmatic, maybe even skeptical about the feasibility of some global policy tools like carbon pricing. It's a complex picture.
It really is.
Yeah.
And this kind of brings us to how they view innovation itself, adaptation,
Yeah.
and ultimately maybe where they find hope amidst all these challenges.
Nordhaus seems, well, bullish on technological change, but maybe with a caveat.
Yeah, I'd say that's fair. He's optimistic about innovation, but he notes it's often unpredictable. It happens somewhat unseen, kind of bubbling up over years, even decades.
Not always big eureka moments.
Not usually, no. He points to the U.S. shale gas revolution as a prime example. He argues that wasn't just one invention. It was the result of decades of sort of quiet work, including federal support for early fracking research way back in the 70s and 80s.
Oh, I didn't know about the federal role.
Yeah, combined with relentless private sector refinement of techniques like horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing, it totally changed the U.S. energy landscape in ways very few people predicted beforehand.
And he sees parallels for clean tech.
He hopes so. He sees potential in small nuclear startups maybe following a similar trajectory. It kind of proves his point that smaller, faster, lighter, denser, cheaper can drive innovation, even in sectors that seem traditionally slow-moving.
And he also stresses the importance of adapting to climate change, doesn't he?
Absolutely. His view seems to be that adaptation isn't really optional anymore. It's going to be essential. Because, he argues, we probably have less direct control over the global temperature knob than we often assume.
Meaning we can't just turn down the heat easily.
Kind of. He references thinkers who see climate change not just as a pollution problem, but as a complex, almost emergent feature of global modernity. Something deeply intertwined with how our world works, which suggests it's a phenomenon we'll need to navigate through a long, probably quite messy process.
Because even if emissions fall, the CO2 already up there keeps warming us.
Exactly. Even if global emissions plateau or start declining, atmospheric concentrations of CO2 will continue to rise for a considerable time, locking in further warming, which makes adaptation simply unavoidable.
And this contrasts pretty sharply with Andrew Forrest's view on something like geoengineering, right?
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
Forrest is firmly against geoengineering. He dismissed it as fundamentally unproven, incredibly risky. I think he used the phrase challenging an elephant with a needle.
Not a fan, then.
Not at all. He insists the singular focus has to remain on eliminating fossil fuel emissions using the technologies that are available now, like green hydrogen.
Which brings up that idea of whether there's, one single silver bullet solution. Bryony Worthington and the sources seem to advocate for keeping multiple parallel options open: electrification, hydrogen, maybe biofuels, nuclear.
Right, a portfolio approach. Whereas Forrest, while he acknowledges other technologies and, as we said, invests in some, like batteries.
Yeah, Williams Advanced Engineering.
Right. But he clearly sees green hydrogen as the core, the bulletproof plan B, as he put it. He seems to believe that focusing too much conversation on all these other options just gets in the road of accelerating the transition to hydrogen.
Because he sees hydrogen as the ultimate answer.
He seems to view it as infinitely reproducible, just needs renewable electricity and water, and it returns harmlessly to water when used. He's very confident its cost is coming down rapidly and it can solve the big, hard-to-abate sectors.
So the sources of hope are quite different between the two.
Yeah, they really are. Nordhaus's hope seems rooted in this more nuanced, maybe even slightly cynical view of politics. But finding optimism in the messy process of muddling through the potential for unexpected disruptive innovation, like the shale revolution example, and just the sort of emergent nature of technological progress over time.
Whereas Forrest's hope seems much more singularly focused.
Definitely. Driven by his unwavering belief in green hydrogen as the inevitable, safe, infinite fuel that humanity needs, and his determination to make it happen.
Gives you a lot to think about, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. We've really deep dived into some incredibly powerful ideas here, drawing from two very distinct perspectives, haven't we?
Yeah, you've got the industrial titan, Forrest, making these huge bets on a specific technological solution he's championing.
And then Nordhaus, the policy expert, dissecting the broader, really complex landscape of energy transition, how innovation actually works, the political realities.
We've explored that intense debate around hydrogen versus direct electrification,
The complicated political dynamics around nuclear power.
the fundamental hurdles facing global climate talks like COP.
That immediate, undeniable threat of lethal humidity that Forrest raised.
Yeah, that was stark. Plus the vital role of innovation, often happening in unexpected ways.
And the essential reality of adaptation, that we need to prepare for changes already underway.
It's abundantly clear there isn't one simple, easy answer to decarbonizing the entire world, is it?
Not even close. But hopefully, by understanding these different viewpoints, the specific details behind their arguments, the practical and political realities they highlight, hopefully you feel much better equipped to understand the massive challenge and the potential pathways ahead.
Definitely. And I guess this leaves us with a pretty compelling thought to kick around. Given Andrew Forrest's strong belief in hydrogen as that bulletproof plan B, the one clear path forward in his view, and Ted Nordhaus's observation that maybe we have less direct control over the global temperature than we'd like, and that adaptation is absolutely crucial. Does the future of energy truly hinge on finding one ideal fuel or primary solution to completely replace fossil fuels?
Or
Uh-huh.
is it more likely to be, well, a much messier, multifaceted approach, involving many different technologies deployed unevenly across the globe, alongside a necessary and probably increasing focus on adapting to the climate changes that are already locked in and happening? What stands out to you?